Which doesn't really make sense unless you know it's spelled W-I-T-C-H, not W-H-I-C-H. There you go. One of the few things in which Catholics and Protestants could agree were witches. Witches were bad. They were in league with the devil. They wore big pointy hats and coveted ruby slippers. Concerns about witches went back to the early 14th century, when Pope John XII commissioned a team of theological experts to look into the phenomenon. In 1327 he issued a bull, Super Ilius Specula, the follow-up was called Expialidocious, which confirmed that yes, witches were real, that magical practices were heretical, and look out, she's got a broom. But after that, nothing much happened for a long time. Then, in 1487, the whole thing was given new impetus by the publication of a witch hunter's textbook called Malleus Maleficarum, Hammer of Witches. And from then on, Europe, and subsequently America, was convulsed by bouts of witch hunts. It has been estimated that between 40 and 50,000 people were killed for being witches between 1400 and 1800. Different places peaked at different times. Witch hunting was particularly virulent in Germany until, in 1691, a Dutch Reformed pastor called Balthasar Becker wrote The World Bewitched, a book that tore the process to shreds and shamed many Protestant leaders into stopping the trials. One of the most intense persecutions was in Scotland, in the mid-17th century, where the Church of Scotland invented the torture of sleep deprivation in order to extract confessions. Their invention is still used by many a secret policeman around the world today. Indeed, the last witch to be executed in Britain was in Scotland, where in 1727 a poor mad woman was accused of turning her daughter into a pony. She was burned alive. In America, the worst excesses were at Salem, Massachusetts in 1692. There, the Quaker leaders gave into a kind of mass paranoia, interrogating some 150 suspects and executing 19 of them. One of the judges at the Salem witch trials, Samuel Sewell, later issued a public apology for his actions and asked for forgiveness. He later wrote a pamphlet supporting the anti-slavery movement, which is perhaps some form of amends. Being Jesuitical. Has anyone heard from the Pope recently? No? Me neither. And there's a reason for that. The position hemorrhaged power over the centuries. The old arguments about who should appoint bishops were long lost. The Catholic powers had all made bishops answerable to their heads of state, rather than to Rome. And the Jesuits, set up, you'll recall, to reform the Catholic Church and propagate Catholicism, had gone the way of all the other movements before them, amassing their own power and wealth. They were widely detested, even outlawed. Throughout the 1760s, the Jesuits were banned in Portugal, France, and the Spanish Empire. Pressure was put on the Pope to abolish the order. He offered to reform it, but France in particular was having none of it, and in the end, the Society of Jesus was dissolved in 1773, or almost. It actually survived in countries where you'd least expect it, countries outside the control of Rome, like Protestant Prussia and Orthodox Russia. Their policies of toleration meant that the Jesuits could continue underground, as it were, covertly. Expect great things. By the late 18th century, the British Empire was the global superpower. The sheer expanse of their holdings offered opportunities to missionaries to travel to far-flung climes and convert the heathen. William Carey, 1761 to 1834, has been called the father of modern mission, a title which only works if you ignore about 200 years of Catholic missions. But he was certainly a remarkable man, and the first major missionary from the ranks of the dissenters. He was a cobbler in Northamptonshire who taught himself Greek and Hebrew and went to India, founding the Baptist Missionary Society along the way. Carey's great motto was, "Expect great things from God, attempt great things for God." He was also a great Bible translator. Carey printed the first Bible in Bengali. Unlike Catholic missionaries, the Protestant approach could not rely on the images and objects that priests used to tell the story, nor could they point to a wide roster of different saints. They had the Bible, and that needed translation. Translation was tricky. There were the difficulties of squeezing the Bible into languages that sometimes contained only a few hundred words. Translation meant finding out all they could about the culture. There was a story of one native whose name for the missionary was "the white man with the book who torments us with questions." In countries that have never seen a sheep, what word do you use for the Lamb of God? The translator working among the Inuit went for seal pup. Many times it went wrong, as in the story of the missionary who purportedly translated heavenly as sky blue, encouraging the prayer, "Ah, sky blue, Father." When Luther translated the Bible into German, only 15 translations of the Bible had been made. By 1600, that figure had risen to 40. By 1700, it had risen to 52. By the start of the 19th century, the Bible had been translated into about 70 languages, mostly those of Middle Europe and the Mediterranean region. In the next century, the pace of translation was to accelerate markedly. In 1804, the British Foreign Bible Society, dedicated to translating and printing the scriptures and distributing them around the world, was founded. And over the next 2 centuries, they were to make the Bible available in over 800 languages. No organisation in history has done more to make the Bible available throughout the world. Independence Day. 3 years after the demise of the Jesuits, America chucked a lot of tea about and declared war on Britain, which they won due to A, not fighting fairly, and B, having the support of the French, who were just bitter about losing Canada. Of course, you can't have a Church of England in America. Well, you could, but it wouldn't have been tremendously popular. So the Anglicans had a marketing meeting and rebranded themselves as Episcopalians, that is, the Church of Bishops. The Episcopalians were just one of several denominations that had established themselves in America. There were thriving communities of Baptists, Quakers, Congregationalists. So when the Constitution was finally agreed in 1787, Congress agreed that there should be no official state religion, and that no one should be kept out of office for religious reasons. For the first time since Constantine, there was an official separation between church and state. And that is why every president since then has had to be a Christian. Hang on, I'll get back to you on that one. Anyway, one of the effects of independence was that the Americans could start printing their own Bibles. Before then, as a British colony, it was illegal to publish any Bible in English. All Bibles had to be imported from England. The first book printed in English in the newly formed United States was the New Testament, printed in Philadelphia in 1777 by Robert Aitken. And, significantly, it was the King James Version. They didn't call it the Authorized Version. No king had any right to authorize anything in America any longer, or even authorize with a Z, as they would spell it. As the first printed book in America, it gained a certain mythic status. It is one of the country's founding documents, a book that bound the fledgling nation together. And, with typical American entrepreneurial flair, Bibles were printed in enormous numbers and sold cheap. The result was that in the United States, more even than in Britain, the KJV became sacred. Today, the Bible Belt of the United States has a deep dedication to the King James Version. The King James Bible was produced under the supervision of a spendthrift, heavy-drinking, bisexual king who agreed to it only because he wanted to quash some Republican marginal notes. And it has become the beloved holy book of the American right-wing, teetotal, ultra-Republican Bible Belt. Officially, though, the USA was a multi-faith country. In 1791, the Bill of Rights secured freedom of religion, and United States law does not designate Christianity as its official faith. Today, 4 other world continents house more Christians than North America, yet, more than any other nation, the USA is seen as a Christian nation. Officially, it has always shied away from that. If anything, it is deist. The coins bear the motto, "In God we trust." The Pledge of Allegiance talks of one nation under God. Jesus is never mentioned. A similar ambivalence can be seen in the religion of the Founding Fathers. The famous cannabis farmer, George Washington, in his diary for the 12th to 13th of May 1765, he records that he sowed hemp at Muddy Hole by Swamp. Washington was happy to talk about providence, but avoided getting any more specific. Benjamin Franklin was a typical product of the Enlightenment. As an old man, he said he would find out the truth about Jesus when he died. Thomas Jefferson spent his spare time cutting out all the miracles from the Gospels and compiling a scrapbook of Jesus' moral teachings. Revolting French. Britain had had the Glorious Revolution. America had had its revolution against the English. France was feeling left out. There was widespread famine. The land was ruled by an arrogant, unfeeling aristocracy. You could be sentenced to death for making your own thought. The church owned, scandalously, up to 1/5 of France. Small wonder there were mobs on the streets. Its parliament hadn't met for, about 200 years. In the end, Louis XVI ran out of cash, and the inevitable happened. The commoners took over. They declared the rights of man, they abolished tithes, the tax paid to the church, and they confiscated all church property. The monasteries were closed, and it was declared that from then on, the clergy would be elected by the people. Parliament started abolishing things, including slavery, the church, King Louis XVI, he was beheaded, and God. Christianity was replaced by a new shiny cult of reason. Churches were ransacked and turned into temples of reason. Crosses were removed from graveyards, whose gates now bore the cheery inscription, "Death is an eternal sleep." The altar of the Cathedral of Notre Dame was replaced with an altar to liberty. Saints' days were scrapped and replaced with fruit, vegetable and flower days. It shows that whatever else about the church you know, the flower arrangements will always survive. The old Sabbatarian 7-day system was decimalised. Weeks now consisted of 10 days. It was the first full-scale, statewide attack on the church in Europe since the days of the Roman Empire. But the madness was everywhere. There was a reign of terror when thousands of suspected counter-revolutionaries were summarily executed. As stability and security collapsed inside the regime, they tried to focus on enemies outside, declaring war and invading Belgium and Holland. This war saw the rise of a small man from Corsica. The up-and-coming General Napoleon Bonaparte led the army to victories in Italy, even capturing Rome and the Pope himself. In 1799, he returned to Paris and staged a coup, disbanding Parliament and declaring himself emperor. Napoleon worshipped, but only when he looked in a mirror. He was the hero of his own story, and the only object worthy of his own veneration. But he banned the cult of reason, and cut a deal with Pope Pius VII. If the Church approved of Napoleon's regime, he would restore the property and prestige that had been lost during the French Revolution. Pius agreed, and in 1804 travelled to Paris, where he was supposed to crown Napoleon emperor. It was the Holy Roman Empire, TM, all over again, although that was finally closed down the same year when the last emperor was persuaded to relinquish the title and became just the Emperor of Austria. In the event, the Pope was humiliated. At the last moment, Napoleon took the crown from the Pope's hands and crowned himself. There was, after all, only one man in the world good enough to crown Napoleon, and that was Napoleon. Napoleon was finally defeated in 1815 by the general they named the boots after, Wellington, or possibly Doc Martin, one of the two. So, the Catholic Church was back, and they got back the Papal States, which Napoleon had confiscated. The Jesuits returned as well, and indeed, the Middle Ages generally, because the next Pope along put all the Jews back in the ghettos. It was just like the good old days.